What the Speak, episode 40. No, I was talking to you. No, not her. I don't know her name. What is it? Lanolin? Lanolin? Like sheep's wool?
Do you kick ass when you speak, present, or pitch? If not, these expert discussions and insider tips can help you right now, today. Welcome to the What the Speak podcast. I'm your host, Brian Kelly.
If you've never seen the story behind how and why the What the Speak podcast got started, visit whatthespeak.com/speakbetter to watch the 90-second video. If you like what you see, send the link to someone you know. Richard Rierson, are you ready to answer the question, what the Speak?
Absolutely, man. Let's do it.
All right. So, Richard, you're a leadership coach, a trainer, speaker, and a podcaster. Plus, this is a very cool first from one of my guests. You're a test pilot.
That's true. Yep.
Briefly tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Well, yeah, I am primarily a pilot. I still do work full time as a pilot. I got in the Marine Corps in 1991, and I learned how to fly, and I was a pilot there for the whole 10 years there. Got out in September 2000, or actually June of 2001. Had my dream job at American Airlines, and thought, man, I'm set. I'm going to be flying, do what I love, making all kinds of money. And finished my training on September 8th, 2001, and September 11th was my first official day as a fully checked out pilot at American. And so that I got furloughed October 1st, and that thrust me into the corporate arena. And that's when I learned that all that stuff I learned, I took for granted in the Marine Corps, that kind of leadership development and learning how to be a pilot in a multi-crew aircraft. And that's when I really kind of hit me, all the leadership lessons I learned, and I started applying those things in my everyday kind of life and my job. I flew part-time still with the Kansas Air Guard flying tankers, but primarily in the corporate arena doing all kinds of stuff, from a director of international operations, director of communication, a vice president of operations for a hotel company, land entitlement. Then I moved over to Bombardier about 5 years ago and did program management, and then still not flying. And then 2 years ago, I got back into the flying game. And that's given me a lot of freedom, and because my days are long, and so it gives me some freedom, and that kind of triggered my entrepreneurial journey doing the podcast and the leadership speaking and the coaching. And so fell into the leadership speaking about 7-8 years ago when I was at the hotel company, and I kind of pieced and started talking to my property managers. And that's where I came up with the content, and that's kind of what launched the speaking career on the side.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So, what are the topics that you typically present on when you get before an audience?
Yeah, I typically talk about just the general topic of leadership, but specifically, if you break it down, I come in with a concept that everybody, all of us have a leadership obligation, that all of us need to think and act like a leader. And that's what most people don't realize. They don't typically see themselves as leaders. They think leadership is all about position or title. And I come at it from an aspect of look, we're all obligated, and that leadership is central to all aspects of our lives, from being a father or a spouse or a coworker. It's the whole gamut. And being a parent, and that leadership is central to everything that we do, and it never turns off. It's something it's a journey, it's a lifelong journey, a lifelong process that you never reach a plateau. It's something that just, if you intentionally invest in, it'll pay huge dividends, but you're going to be invested in it till the day you check out.
Yeah, I agree. Well, yeah. I would love to transition to talking with you about your origin story and really how you got into public speaking.
Right.
So I've had a couple of guests on the show that, like yourself, come from a military background, and we've kind of explored that a little bit. And it's quite a different thing to be in the military and to be giving a briefing. Right. But I would love to find out from you, exactly how did you get into this? It sounds like with some of your entrepreneurial stuff, obviously that's grown into something that you're doing now. But, can you share with us your journey into public speaking, maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. I never set out to say, hey, I'm going to be a public speaker. I kind of fell into it in a roundabout way. And it kind of going back to that idea of I was always going to be a pilot. That's what I was going to be. But, September 11th, changed my course and my path, and it made me realize that I'm capable of doing so much more. And this whole idea of common sense leadership, it was based on observations in the real life positions that I was holding, and I was like, look, I wanted to get the message out. I wanted people to understand that you need to start thinking and acting like a leader. And so when I got to the hotel company, and I did, like I said, land entitlement and communication, then I got promoted to the vice president of operations. I had to start training property managers. And I would, at the end of their training, they had a 4-week training course. And at the end, I would come in and give them this concept, this idea, this talk about leadership, that, look, you are in a leadership role. I expect you to make decisions in my absence. Ask for forgiveness, not permission. Those are the type of things I started coming up with. And eventually over time, I started coming up with content, and I was writing things down. And the next thing you know, I had a PowerPoint. And then when I had a PowerPoint, I started talking about it. And it kind of grew from there. And I said, hey, maybe I could take this to the public and get paid. And I got kind of spoiled. I got lucky right out of the gate. As I was I'd come up with the material, I've been speaking about it for a year, and I said, well, let's put a website together. And it was so cheesy. If I look back at it, it was so horrible. It was so bad. It was one of those templates that you bought. This was like 7-8 years ago, and I just plugged and played, and it was like, it was horrible. But through that, a former Marine who was a police detective or a state trooper up in Michigan State, we connected with him, and he had me come down, and he paid me this tremendous amount of money to come speak and do an all-day seminar. And I thought, man, this is so easy. And then that's reality hit after I had that kind of taste of what it could be like, and and the money that you could make from speaking, and it was so fun just to kind of get the message out there, something you believed in, and that started the process. So I've done a lot of free gigs from then, trying to replicate what I experienced right out of the gate. And I have, but I think I was spoiled and kind of suckered in. I think I was kind of told, yeah, this is what you need to do, and here's a taste. But there's been a lot of pain and a lot of freebies from that point on.
Well, that's all part of the journey, right?
Right. Yeah.
So I would love to have you describe a specific area that you've struggled with, maybe over the years as you've done workshops and presentations, and there's a lot of different ways that you've delivered content, I know. But is there a struggle that you can share with us, something that you've been working on to try and improve?
I think initially, it's the limiting belief that what you have to say is of value, of its importance. I mean, I've always struggled with, say, after I give a presentation, I love, and when people come up and they congratulate you, or they say, man, that really meant a lot. I was never comfortable receiving that, if that makes sense. I always felt like I wasn't worthy of receiving that. Yeah. And I think that once I've and I still have to work on it, but now that I look at those, when you know that you do well in a presentation, and someone comes up to you and they thank you for that you accept it as a gift and what it is for that moment and that fleeting moment, and then you let it go, and then you drive on, and not, because that way, to me, it's a healthy balance of not, number one, I think it's a crime to beat yourself up and say because we all have a story, we all have something worthy of sharing with everybody. I think I do believe that. And I think if you got something to say, then you should say it, and you should say it with authenticity and courage, and that connects with people. And when someone thanks you for it, accept it for the gift that it is. And at the same time, I think it's healthy to let it go, because it's real easy in this game to kind of start to believe your own press. And I'd never want to be guilty of that, I guess. I never want to go the other way and say, look how great I am, because I never, you know what I mean? So to me, I think it keeps you grounded, it keeps you centered. So for me, that was a struggle. And then the kind of the technical side of it is just coming up with content ever changing and being fresh and being new. I struggle with writer's block a lot. I don't know if you've ever deal with that, but trying to continuously come up with quality content is a struggle, I think, for me.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing. I want to transition now to the portion of our discussion where we talk about expert perspective and some of the things that you have experienced through the various things that you've been involved in. I know that you specialize in leadership skills and training. So I was wondering, can you talk about why it's so essential for leaders and leaders of all types to be able to talk with persuasion and clarity?
Well, I mean, leadership is all about influence. I mean, I think, again, I alluded to the fact that I'm a firm believer that we all have a leadership obligation, whether you like it or not, or whether you know it or not. You have a leadership obligation, and you will be called at some point to lead. If you're a parent, for example, is a great example. I mean, if you have a leadership obligation, whether you have the title or not, and so it's in our best interest to learn what it means to lead. And I think it's important for people to believe, number one, that they have leadership potential within them, and it's not about being charismatic. It's not about, for me, in the beginning, I was always thinking, well, I have to be this larger than life figure. I have to be like John Wayne. I have to have this commanding presence when I walk in a room, and that's a fallacy. And some of the best leaders or leadership examples are those individuals that were stuck in the middle or in the middle and in the most challenging position, that they have to lead up, I have to lead down, and I have to lead across. There's millions of people like us. We all been there. And that's where you can actually make the most change and transformation and effectiveness. And for me, I mean, that's the message that I want to get across, is that you can make a difference. Rosa Parks, changed the world by just, what did she do? If you look technically at what did she do? She refused to get up out of a seat. She said no, right? And she was willing to get arrested. Those are three things that every single one of us has the capability to do. No, there's not every single one of us. So what's the difference? The difference is you got to be courageous. And that's why I think leadership is so important. It's not about the larger than life, charismatic Lone Ranger figure that comes in and saves the day. It's the individuals like you and me and the people that we're accountable for, the person on the front line, that $8 an hour riveter that can literally change, the world, can change the business, can change the profitability. And that's the message that I want people to understand. And that's why leadership is so important. It's not about a position or title. That doesn't make the leader. It's the actions of the individuals that make that brings out the leadership in people.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, being a leader is very much about being able to influence. And there's a lot of different ways to influence people, but I think at the end of the day, it's being able to have a conviction about something and being able to, convey it in a way to those that are looking to you as a leader, whether directly or indirectly, and being able to point those individuals in this direction, that you as a leader feel, is the way to go, or the course to take. So, um,
Yeah,
is
and
there anything else specific that you would share related to leadership communication skills, and how that kind of relates directly to getting up in front of an audience, whether it's a few people or a few hundred people?
yeah, I think you hit on the fact that at the core, I think the new authority, or the authority of leadership that has always been there, that we don't talk about much, is authenticity. I think authenticity and vulnerability and courage, all those things wrapped up, that is essential to great leadership, and that is essential to being a great communicator. I think too often, you and I were talking prior to this recording about what makes certain speakers so great. And the previous guy you interviewed earlier today was talking about how, look, I don't consider myself a speaker. This is just who I am. And that's probably why he's so successful, because he's authentic, he's passionate, and people see that authenticity. People are tired of the mask that everybody wears. I mean, and I think that's the first step to being a great communicator and a great leader, is stop trying to be somebody that you're not. Just put yourself out there. It's much more, is it much more challenging? Maybe on the surface, but it's much more courageous to just be all out there and be present and say, this is who I am, warts and all, take it or leave it. Doesn't mean you don't, act in decorum and be professional. But, there's a fine, it's not being fake. It's not being inauthentic. You have to stop wearing the masks. I think when I first started speaking, I think I thought this is how I had to be.
Yeah.
And the moment I started being real and saying, this is who I am, and opened up my heart, I mean, those are the moments that you capture the audience and you communicate most effectively, in my opinion. Authenticity and vulnerability are key.
I agree. I mean, it's like, people think that I have to put on this facade that I'm, you know, s- polished, however you want to label it. Um, but really, at the end of the day, what people are looking for, your audience is looking for, is to be able to connect with you and, realize what it is that you're sharing with them, especially, if you're up in front of a room of people, it's likely because you have something of value to share.
Right.
And being able to do that in a way that's authentic, that's real, that isn't kind of like that salesman type of persona, let's say, that, it doesn't matter if you can say something without using the word or fumbling over your words. What matters is at the end of it is that you've been able to make a connection and share your passion with those individuals, that ultimately they go out of that room and they make some type of change.
Yeah. You said something there. I think that a lot of people could save a lot of time, I think, in kind of propel if they really want to get into the speaking business. Certainly you need to always, perfect your craft and learning how to not stumble your words and say and this and that. But I think we focus too much on that in the beginning. I think we focus on like the how-tos and like, I'm going to be this most polished. And if you could just from the get-go focus on the authenticity piece, the rest of it's going to fall in place. I think you can always, improve how you're communicating, because watching yourself, it's always surprising to see the little idiosyncrasies that you do. But you know what? Sometimes it's those idiosyncrasies that make who you are. I mean, Johnny Carson's a perfect example, right? I mean, you can think of 4 or 5 different things that Johnny Carson did every night of the Tonight Show in his monologue, right? The shrugging the shoulders and the nervous tics that he didn't even know he was doing, and that kind of made him. So I'm less concerned about trying to be polished, I guess, And look at some of the great TED Talks, they're not some of the ones they're just being. They're just who they are, I guess, is what I'm saying. I mean, at the same time, you got to continue to perfect your craft. But
yeah, I mean, just to kind of wrap that thought up, I think that it's, to be clear for the audience that you always want to be elevating your game. You always want to be striving to be better with your craft. But I think a lot of people sometimes when they're just getting started feel like they're not good enough.
Yeah.
And this is essentially saying that you are good enough, that if you just start and you just start to communicate with, true heart of who you are and what you're about, that's going to get you started. And
Absolutely.
From there, then you can start to focus more on, your stage mechanics, so to speak, or, your specific delivery method or where you stand or how you stand. All of those things, can be important, but they're not essential, and they shouldn't be the thing that gets in your way of standing up and sharing your message.
Absolutely. Yeah. Great way to wrap it up. Yeah, for sure.
So, John, I wanted to ask you, I read that you were a certified John Maxwell coach. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
So through that, I know that you often offer multiple types of speaking engagements, from keynotes to seminars, things like retreats and trainings. I would love to get your perspective on how are each of these different, and what do you do to prepare for the various types of formats?
Well, the keynote is obviously I love those because of the bread and butter. You can get in and you can get out, but it's there typically for just, 30 minutes to an hour, typically, at a lunch, and then you cut out on the second one. So you're asking the difference between the keynote and a seminar and a workshop?
Yeah. So, there's different ways that when you're going in, that you engage with the audience. So the keynote is that kind of that first one where you're up front and center. A seminar is a little bit different, where it's maybe slightly informal. And then you've got other types of trainings or workshops.
That's correct. Yeah. And essentially what I do is the content I have about 8 to 10. It depends on, I vacillate, but I try to have about 8 to 10 types of content where it's focused on a specific program. And each of those I can tailor to each. And so in other words, I can take this same topic and say, if I take John Maxwell's 21 Irrefutable Laws, I could turn that into a 30-minute lunch and learn, or I could extend it out to a full day workshop where we're doing breakouts and mechanics and everything else. And so I try to keep every type of content I come up with, I try to have its core, its essential message, and then depending on what the client wants, I can tailor it for as short or as long as we need to.
Nice.
And so if I do the workshop, that's the most challenging, obviously, but that's where I try to get a lot of interaction, a lot of breakouts, a lot of, hey, we're getting up, we're moving around, we're doing exercises to drive the point home. And so that's just how I look at it. And the seminars, like you said, is a little more informal. It's almost like running a mastermind where it's almost like I'm certainly a facilitator, but I will also be a participant. And that's how I like to run a seminar. So I'll be up at the whiteboard, and asking questions, try to generate. It's more about me asking questions and generating topics, but I'm driving it through the facilitation piece. And there'll be times though where I'll be standing up facilitating, but then I'll sit down with them amongst everybody else, and like I'm one of them, right? Based on the questions. And so in the seminar, I'm asking more open-ended questions. It's more like a coaching kind of mastermind. A keynote is just me talking and presenting, and of course, a workshop is just a full-on, hands-on interactive experience.
It's interesting. I mean, they're all rooted in very similar. A very similar place, I guess, but there is a unique approach that you take with each one of those. And I thought it would be great to kind of get your insights into that for people who are just maybe getting started with speaking in general, and the different ways that you can engage with an audience through those various formats. So thank you.
Yeah. My favorite is actually the seminar, because again, it's more of, that's where you start because everybody, and it's not so much workshop where you're, breaking people into groups and doing exercises. It's more of thoughtful, meaning discussion, and you see people come up with the answers themselves. To me, that's really fun. It's like the heart of communicating. It's the heart of coaching. It's like, asking open-ended questions and stimulating thought and seeing where it goes. And they're fun because they're all different. Even though the message is the same, they all end up being unique vehicles and that's why they're so much fun.
I agree. Well, John, to wrap things up, I want to finish with our rapid Q&A portion of the discussion. Maybe a half dozen questions that I've got here that we can throw out at you, and then have you just give a quick response. And the first one is, I wanted to ask you, are you a slide or no slide type of guy?
I'm definitely no slides guy now. I used to be slides at the beginning, but I found out I was using them as a crutch, and I really started knocking my presentations out of the park when I went completely no slides. Slides can be great, but if you want to do it, and when I try to do it, and I'm not as good as the late Steve Jobs used to do. Steve Jobs was the master at using slides in presentation. The one graphic, the one thing. If you're going to use slides, use them in that context. That's what I try to do. In the beginning, if you look, it was all bullet points, and I found out what I was doing. I was just relying on them as a crutch, to help the speech. And if they help you, it's okay. But my gosh, I mean, how many of us have sat through boring presentations where it's one bullet point after another? The second I got rid of the slides, the more engaged they were with me, and they're looking at me. They're not looking, and I don't do handouts either, by the way. I don't do handouts till after the presentation. It's just I want them totally focused on me.
Great. So the next question I have for you is, who is a speaker that inspires you the most, and why?
Les Brown is probably my favorite. I don't know if you've ever seen him speak in person. I've had the opportunity to be live and see him speak, and he just blows you away. And I think I love him primarily because of his backstory. He doesn't have any formal education after high school. He was the first manager of the Jackson 5. He was a DJ. He never sought out to be a public speaker. He kind of fell into it, saw he had a gift, and he believes what he says. He tries to live out what he says. He's authentic. And man, if you see him speak, you will be on your feet with goosebumps. I mean, he's just great. I don't know if you've ever seen him speak. But
yeah,
man,
I've seen him speak, and I agree with you. He's quite a trip, and very, very authentic.
Yeah.
See, now I'm surprised. I thought you were going to say John Maxwell.
Well, John's great too, but I've always followed John, and he comes out and he sits on his chair, and he just raps with you, and he's funny, but I don't know. I don't know, Les Brown. I guess it's because I like Les Brown's backstory that makes him more appealing to me, I guess. but he gets you on your feet. He's just highly motivating in the authentic way. I hate kind of that cheesy false motivation.
Yeah, well, it's kind of his personality is one of those infectious types to
Yeah,
where
right.
you're like, yeah, whatever you say, I'm right there with you.
Yeah. And he believes him. And he's been there. He's been through some, scary, dark times, from personal health to tragedies with his family. I don't know. I think it's those life stories that make a great speaker.
Yeah.
And if you come out there with a lot of techniques and costumes and a persona, I don't know. That just doesn't do it for me.
All right, so I want to ask you now, what is the craziest, funniest, most ridiculous thing that might have happened to you while in front of an audience when presenting?
Yeah, it was when I was still, it wasn't a paid gig, but it was a pretty important presentation that I had to do where I was working. And it was a joint presentation, but it was primarily me, and I was leading it off. And my boss, who I'd worked for, and some people had told him, like, man, you got to see Richard speak. I mean, he's, I've been looking for this opportunity to get in front of a lot of people. And these were a lot of high value executives had come from Montreal. And so it was a room of heavy hitters. And I thought, what a great opportunity, because I love to speak. I love to present. It was a chance for me to highlight my team. I had my team members there. It was a great project that saved the company a lot of money. It was a big deal. And I was so excited. Well, 3 days prior to that, I had a pretty heavy bout of the flu. I mean, I was bedridden. I was down for the count for 3 days. So I was getting there, but I was ready to go. And the morning of, I was good to go. I was fine. But you know how when you have the flu, you can get dehydrated pretty easy, right? So presentation kicked off at 8:00, and I got up. And when you initially get up to speak initially, and just the initial where your chest is kind of tight and your pulse picks up because you're starting, just the normal, the butterflies and all that. Well, for whatever reason, because I was dehydrated, I started getting tunnel vision and was about to faint. Like, I got so lightheaded that I couldn't, I almost fainted, and I had to stop. I mean, literally, I'm 30 seconds into the presentation, kicking it off, and I almost fainted. Wow. And I had to be like, I got to stop, guys. I'm about to pass out. And so one of my colleagues who had made the presentation with me, he picked up and he improvised and he picked up my spots, and it went off fine. And I actually got better, and I finished the last half. But I just stressed about it for so long, thinking, now all these people, they heard how great of a speaker it was, and now they just figured I just got all these nerves and that I couldn't handle it. So anyway, it was one of those opportunities where I kind of blew it, but I was dehydrated. But yeah, I was afraid everybody thought, oh, he's just got stage fright, but it was more about dehydration.
You're like, no, really, I just had the flu.
That's right.
Okay, so Richard, I want to ask you, what type of impact has speaking and your ability to speak had on your career, your business and the things that you're doing right now?
Well, I mean, it's opened up a tremendous amount of opportunities, and obviously there's been tremendous opportunities, financial gain. Obviously, I've been compensated. Still working at it just like everybody else, trying to make it happen. Am I the Mark Sanborn or the Chris Widener or anybody else out there? No, not yet. But it's given me a lot of confidence. It's opened up a lot of doors. It's a lot, and that confidence seems to keep building and building and building. It's allowed me to take the risk for the podcast. It's allowed me to build a network that the biggest surprising thing is to build a network of people that are in my Rolodex, people that I can turn to that I never thought would have been in there. And I lead that all to the idea of being willing to get up there on stage, to take the risk, to communicate on a podcast, to take the kind of entrepreneurial leap. All of that wouldn't have happened if I didn't say, hey, I got a story to tell. I'm passionate about what I want to say, and I just took the risk to do it. So we'll see where it goes. But I mean, I'm excited about where it's going to go. And I think if you're willing to learn how to become a better communicator, I mean, the world can be your oyster in a sense, in your own little way. It doesn't mean you're necessarily going to rule the world, and that's not what it's about, but you can certainly change your part of the world. I honestly believe that if you're willing to put it out there.
Absolutely. Well, our last question is about what kind of advice would you give either somebody who's just starting off, or if you could go back in time to when you first started getting into speaking, the things that you've learned over the years, what advice would you give to somebody just beginning?
Well, I would say, understand that you're going to be afraid. I mean, that's part of the game. I think we don't waste a lot of energy trying to figure out how everybody says public speaking is, one of the greater fears than what is it than dying, I guess.
Dying,
Right?
yeah.
And so, understand that you're going to be afraid, but stand firm on your shaky legs, just like the book of Hebrews says, you're going to be afraid. So get used to it. In fact, it can be if you can get comfortable with that, just knowing you're going to be, just understand it's part of the normal process. I don't know any speaker who doesn't get a little bit, not necessarily afraid, but gets butterflies almost every time they present. I think that's just part of the deal. But focus on being authentic, and if you're willing to be 100% completely present. And when I say that, when you speak, stop worrying about yourself and start looking at your audience and try to connect with them and try to add value to them. It goes back to the whole leadership thing. Leadership is influence, and the best way that you can be influential is add value to other people. And if you make it external, not about yourself, that's when you're going to start knocking it out of the park. That's when you're going to start connecting with an audience. That's when you start becoming a better leader, is add value to others. It's as simple as that. And stop worrying about yourself.
Well, Richard, we'll have links to your website, your podcast, all your social media profiles over in the show notes at whattospeak.com. And I want to sincerely, deeply, and truly thank you for sharing your time, your expertise, and a little bit of your story as someone who truly kicks ass when they speak, present, or pitch.
Well, thank you for having me on the show. I love what you're doing. I love the fact that the fellow podcasters knocked out of the park. I love seeing you up there new and noteworthy. So
Thanks.
Congratulations to you for crushing it on your early launch. And so I'm excited and honored that you considered me a part of this, part of your deal.
Great. Well, thanks again, Richard.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Are you working out right now or listening to this episode while driving? If so, I know you're not able to leave a rating and review in iTunes at the moment. However, next time you're in front of your computer or smartphone, could you be sure to do so? Just go to whattospeak.com/audio or whattospeak.com/video. Thanks so much for your support.
All right, here we go with the outro.
Thanks so much for joining us today on What to Speak. Be sure to visit whattospeak.com for show notes on every episode and to sign up for our email list to stay updated on resources that'll help you kick ass when you speak, present, or pitch.